Are you sad that Senator Lindsey Graham has died?
No, I'm not sad. He was a man who said awful things, genocidal things, racist things, and we put that on the record for people to see. That doesn't mean he didn't also do, I'm sure, good things in Congress as well, but overwhelmingly he argued for wars, including this Iran war that outlives him, that killed 100 schoolgirls on day one of the war. He argued for the Iraq war that you and I opposed, that killed over 1 million people. He never met a Middle East country he didn't want to invade, and I think that's how we should remember him. We should remember the full record.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Public verdict here. Mehdi Hasan just sat down with Piers Morgan and a Trump campaign staffer. And things got real the moment Piers asked him one blunt question. Are you sad Lindsey Graham died? What follows isn't the media playing nice and pretending disagreements disappear the moment someone passes? It's Mehdi laying out the actual voting record and rhetoric, point by point, and refusing to soften it just because the cameras are rolling right after a death. Before that, there's a whole segment on the Iran war. The exit strategy nobody in the administration can articulate, and Trump's own contradictions on the subject, caught on tape. Stick around for the breakdown, and if you want more of this kind of accountability, hit subscribe before we dive in. Let's get into it.
This idea that Trump is going to start a blockade again, start bombing again, start threatening Cargill Island again, and anything fundamentally will change is absurd. We know that it won't change. We know the two sides are locked into this position. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. We know that negotiations is the only way to deal with the nuclear program. That was what was on the table on February 28th, that Trump and Netanyahu decided to wreck together. The war is a disaster. Let me just deal with a lot of things that Hogan has said. Number one, just on USAID, just one last point. The idea this was some woke lefty department. The left were very critical of USAID for many years. One of the programs that the Doge really undermined was the anti-AIDS program, PEPFAR, George Bush's program. Marco Rubio was one of the biggest champions of USAID, as was the late Lindsey Graham, I should say. So this was not some left-wing thing. Even Republicans used to recognize that aid abroad is a good thing for the United States. Number two, on terms of the actual war and how it's going, it's funny that Hogan said, well, what about the ballistic missiles? Well, according to US intelligence, Iran still retains 70% of its ballistic missile capability. And the funniest thing about debating Trump people is Trump always throws you under the bus. Hogan's saying ballistic missiles are bad. But I heard Trump say a couple of weeks ago that it's fine for Iran to have ballistic missiles. They have a right to have ballistic missiles. And when a reporter said, wait, hold on, you want Iran to have ballistic missiles? He goes, well, I can't tell them not to if everyone else has them. So Trump is all over the place on this. A month ago, he said the Iranian regime were good people, nice people, smart people, rational people. Over the weekend, he said they're evil, sick people. This is the most erratic man who has ever held any kind of power in this country. And as for going to war, Hogan says stupid war. Piers, you rightly say this is a stupid war. And by the way, he didn't just say stupid war. He said no more wars in multiple rallies. Hogan was the campaign press secretary in 2024. He was there when Donald Trump said, I don't have wars, he said. He said on election night, I'm going to stop wars. I'm not going to start a war. He started this war for no good reason because Lindsey Graham and Benjamin Netanyahu and others persuaded him to do this ridiculous war. And now we're in this stupid war where oil prices are up. He also said, by the way, Hogan, you remember, he said, I'm going to end inflation on day one. We're going to bring prices down. Instead, we've got gas prices going up and up and up because the Iranians know if they hold out for the midterms, it's going to hurt Trump and the Republicans. They have their own incentive for keeping this going. And Piers, I don't know if I said it on this show or another show, but I said, this war is not over when the MOU was signed, when the so-called ceasefire was done.
Yeah, I don't think anybody thought it was. I honestly think Donald Trump is scrabbling to find an exit ramp, and he's finding it really hard because the Iranians...
escalating to exit is not a good move.
But you don't think 47 years of terror and October 7th was a good enough reason to...
So why didn't he say that on the campaign trail, Hogan?
Well,
why didn't he say, I'm going to become president and I'm going to go to war with Iran to punish them for 1979?
Well, actually, I would say, I would look at it differently. Look, you've got a lot of bad actors around the world. You've got North Korea, you've got Russia, you've got China, you've got others, right? And America doesn't march in and attack all those countries for good reason, right? Simply being a bad regime, as we learned...
Also, they have nukes, Piers.
Well, as we learned...
They have nukes
I know, that's the point. But the principle should be the same. I remember with the Iraq War debate in 2003, I opposed that very vociferously. Because I just thought this makes no sense. And it backfired horribly and had 20 years of mayhem and led to the rise of ISIS and so on. You don't necessarily have to march in and attack bad actors in regions. Now, I will never defend a thing this regime has done in Iran. They're a despicable, awful regime that oppresses its people, and they've clearly supplied arms and resources to a bunch of terror groups in the Middle East. All of that is inarguable. But my concern from day one, and I said it on day one, is what is the war objective here? To get rid of the regime. And if it isn't, the very last thing you should want to do at the end of this war is empower the regime. And I have a horrible feeling that by working out the unexpectedly huge impact of being able to control the Strait of Hormuz, this Iranian regime now feels more emboldened and more powerful than it did 4 months ago. That's my honest problem with this.
Foreign policy, as you know, is fraught with a whole bunch of different issues. I've traveled with the president all over the world. We went to North Korea, actually, China, et cetera, to deal with some of the geopolitical threats that this country faces. Now, they're not imminent threats. They're more economic. They're not military in nature, in that they're not doing kinetic activity in the moment and funding terrorism to try and kill Americans, which Iran, as you pointed out, clearly has done.
When very quickly, Mehdi, because we run out of time.
Hold on. Just on the Iran point, I've got to say very quickly.
No, you can't. You can't, because I've got another guest waiting.
Well, I waited half an hour to come on this show, and then you'd save my vocal cord. So let me just say this. The Iranian regime, to say there's been regime change in Iran is gaslighting of the highest order.
I agree.
We've replaced Ayatollah Khamenei with Ayatollah Khamenei, a more radical, hardline version, who has much more of an incentive to get
Mehdi, I agree with you 100%. So let's forget that. I just want to ask you very finally, Mehdi, are you sad that Senator Lindsey Graham has died?
No, I'm not sad. I'm not celebrating it either, as you suggested in your introduction. I think it's a bit of a straw man to say everyone's celebrating his death. I think as journalists, Piers, you and I, we hold power accountable. We speak truth to power. I'm not of the school that says when a politician dies, a public figure dies, we treat them like a private figure and just shut up. I don't think journalism should turn into hagiography. At Zeteo, for example, we published a list of what Graham said and did. We just let the facts speak for themselves. He was a man who said awful things, genocidal things, racist things, and we put that on the record for people to see. That doesn't mean he didn't also do, I'm sure, good things in Congress as well. But overwhelmingly, he argued for wars, including this Iran war that outlives him, that killed 100 schoolgirls on day one of the war. He argued for the Iraq war that you and I opposed, that killed over 1 million people. He never met a Middle East country he didn't want to invade. And I think that's how we should remember him. We should remember the full record. The problem is when powerful people die, people in our media, especially mainstream corporate media, want to just do hagiography and say, what a wonderful person they were. Weren't they lovely? And I'm sure many of those powerful people were lovely and they have families who love them. But as journalists, our job is to say, here's what they did. Here's the truth about their life and record. Here's an accurate obituary. And with Lindsey Graham, the man has a ton of blood on his hands, and we shouldn't just forget that.
All right, let's actually sit with this one, because it covers a lot of ground. The Iran war, the total absence of a stated objective for it, and then that closing exchange about Lindsey Graham, which is going to be the part people talk about most. Start with the Iran policy thread, because there's a real substantive critique buried under the back and forth. The core question Piers Morgan himself raised, and it's a fair one, regardless of where you land politically, is what the actual objective of this war is. Is it regime change? Is it denuclearization? If it's not regime change, then the strategic risk is that you end up empowering a more radicalized version of the regime you set out to weaken, which is exactly the outcome Mehdi flagged. Swapping one hardline leadership for a more hardline one with more incentive, not less, to pursue a weapon. That's not a partisan point. That's a pretty basic strategic logic problem. And it's one the administration struggled to answer on air. There's also a real inconsistency worth naming in how this administration has talked about the war. Trump campaigned heavily on ending American involvement in foreign wars, and multiple clips exist of him promising exactly that. Whether the shift to military action against Iran represents a justified response to a genuine threat or a departure from that campaign promise is a fair question to raise, and it's the kind of accountability question that should get asked of any administration, regardless of party. Some of the specific claims exchanged in the clip: Iran's retained missile capability, oil price movements, the details of what was or wasn't on the table diplomatically in February are the kind of figures that shift with new intelligence and reporting. So they're worth checking against current sourcing, rather than taking as settled the moment they're said on a panel. Now, the Lindsey Graham exchange. This is worth handling carefully, because a person actually died here, and that deserves basic respect, regardless of political disagreement. This isn't about mocking him or piling on, but Mehdi's underlying argument is a real one in journalism, that public figures, especially ones who held significant power over war and foreign policy for decades, deserve an honest accounting of their record when they pass, not a rewrite. That's not a fringe position. Obituary practices for powerful public figures have long wrestled with exactly this tension between respect for the person and honesty about the impact of their decisions. What's actually verifiable here is Graham's long, well-documented record as one of the Senate's most consistently hawkish voices on the Middle East. He was a vocal supporter of the Iraq War, and he was among the most prominent Republican voices pushing for a harder line against Iran in recent months. Characterizing specific past remarks as genocidal or racist, as Mehdi did, is his own interpretation of things Graham said. A strong claim, and one people can look up and judge for themselves. But it's his characterization, not a settled legal or historical finding. And it's fair to note that distinction even while taking the underlying critique seriously. The bigger, more useful point in that exchange is really about journalism itself. Should a person's power and public record get scrutinized honestly at the moment of their death? Or does death itself functionally end the conversation? Mehdi's answer is that journalism's job doesn't change just because the subject can no longer respond. Reasonable people can disagree about tone and timing, but the underlying principle that a lifetime of consequential political decisions deserves an honest reckoning, not just eulogy, isn't a radical one. That's the real thread running through this whole segment. Accountability that doesn't pause for convenience. Whether it's an administration that can't name its war objective, or a public figure whose record shaped decades of foreign policy, worth sitting with either way. If you want more of these breakdowns, the ones that don't flinch from the uncomfortable parts, hit subscribe, drop a like, and let me know where you land on this in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.